It's hard for me. All right, this is really hard for me. I really like the USA version. I like the way it feels. I like the neck. But the SE version feels really good too, and it's a third of the price. If it were me personally, when the original PRS Silver Sky came out in 2018, I couldn't afford it. And by the time the cheaper version dropped in 2022, I was no longer interested. But like everyone else, I can fall for a massive and masterfully executed ad campaign, and as a result, I have both instruments in here for you today. And lucky for you, but unlucky for me, this video is not sponsored, so I can tell you crazy, shocking truths like this one. These are both Stratocasters. And I have a lot more shocking, unspoken, non-sponsored truths to get to in this video. First, we're going to start from the headstock, work all our way down, and talk about how these two guitars feel and compare from the perspective of a guitarist, not just someone who looks at specs. Then I'm going to talk to you about who should buy each guitar and why. We'll also talk about the price of each guitar and how that is going to inform your buying choice. And in my opinion, that's going to be a huge, huge factor when considering either of these two guitars, but we'll get to that later. And at the very end, we're going to talk about new guitar hype on YouTube. Let's get started. I bought the less expensive SE version of the guitar 2 months ago, and I've been playing it consistently. And then 1 month ago, I purchased the more expensive USA model, and I've been playing them both and comparing them both for the last month. And so I have a decent idea of how these two guitars compare for a somewhat extended period of time. When we look at the headstock of both guitars, they're both similar but slightly different. The SE version has traditional tuners that are not locking, but they stay in tune fine. They've been performing great. And then we have a slightly different truss rod cover, and we have the SE stated on the headstock here. The USA version, of course, just says Paul Reed Smith, but we have the same 3 per side tuners. The buttons of the tuners are exactly the same, and to be completely honest, on both guitars, the buttons feel kind of cheap. But I think that's just a me thing because, again, they both stay in tune fine. The more expensive version and the cheaper version. But the one difference about these tuners is that they are locking, and they're a fancy locking version of tuners that lock from the front instead of the back, so you still have the traditional look on the back. Also on the back of the headstock, we have the serial number written in Sharpie instead of stamped on for the cheaper version, so that's a nice touch. Finally, the truss rod cover on the USA version looks slightly different, but that doesn't really matter. Now, as we move our way from the headstock down to the neck, we start to get to more of the differences that you can tell between these two guitars. The first thing, on the USA version, we have a more expensive nut. I forget what the material is, but I know the more expensive nut is on the USA version, and the SE version has the cheaper synthetic nut. And in terms of the way that these necks feel, the USA version has a fairly fat neck, and it is a C shape. It's not old school telly fat, but it is noticeably fatter than the SE version, and I am someone who really enjoys a fat neck. I quite like the way that this neck feels. It's thicker, the radius is a bit more round also, and the frets themselves are also more narrow. The SE version is thinner, and it feels more like just about every other guitar you get in this price range. They all have this medium C neck. The frets are also wider, and that's not a huge difference. It's more of a personal preference thing. But apart from the fact that this neck is a little bit thinner, the nut is synthetic, but still works and stays in tune perfectly fine, and the frets are a little bit wider, everything else is pretty much the same. Maple back, rosewood fingerboard, and even the PRS birds look pretty much exactly the same on both guitars. So you don't get the prettier version of the PRS birds on the USA version. In terms of fret work, both guitars also feel very good. The frets came out of the box very smooth on both sides. They were leveled nicely. I got the action down to where I would want it to be fairly easily, so there's no complaints there. Now, the one thing, and this is not a big deal at all, but the one thing that I should mention is that the SC version of the guitar came with a nut that was not perfectly smooth. And so when I was using the trem, it was snagging just a little bit and you're getting those different clicking sounds. That being said, a little sandpaper through the nut completely fixed that issue. It took me just a couple of seconds. The more expensive USA version came perfect right out of the box. The action was very high, so I just had to drop it down to where I wanted it to be. But other than that, it was totally fine. Now, in terms of neck stability, both of these guitars have been performing very well. The SE version stays in tune the entire time I'm playing it. It stays in tune for days, and it's been doing really, really well. And of course, the USA version has also been staying in tune incredibly well. Here's the one thing I should mention. I'm in New Jersey, and over the last couple of months, we had a very strange winter where it was like 60 degrees and 70 degrees one day, and then the next day it was in the 30s. When we had that temperature shift, that huge, weird temperature shift, the SE version of this guitar did have a little bit of movement. I woke up that day and the tuning was not perfect like it had been prior. The USA version had still perfect tuning. So for the most part, these two guitars have been staying in tune very, very well. But on that one extreme weather day, the SE version wasn't as perfect as the USA version. That being said, I tuned it up. It was totally fine. And then it stayed in tune ever since. So there isn't much to complain about. These are really strong, solid necks. And to be completely honest, whether or not you would choose one neck or the other is going to be mostly personal preference. The SE version has a slightly thinner neck if you like that type of thing. The USA version has a slightly thicker neck if you like that type of a thing. Now, when it comes to the body of these two guitars, they are pretty much exactly the same. They are both Stratocasters. They have the same belly cut, the same arm contour. The only difference between this and an old school traditional Strat is that we have some nice sculpting up here to get to the upper frets. So you can see the sculpting on the front of the guitar, which is quite nice. But again, you get that sculpting on the cheaper SE version, and you get that same sculpting on the USA version. Now, apart from the way that these guitars are shaped, contoured, all of that stuff, we do have one very minor difference on the back of the guitars. The SE version does come with a back plate, and I just took it off because that's what everyone does anyway. The USA version doesn't come with a back plate. In fact, there's not even screws for it, and to be completely honest, I like that. It saves me 5 seconds when I get a new guitar, but this is not a huge difference here either. By the way, if you like this form of candid talk, you should definitely subscribe to the Guitar Craft and Other Stuff podcast. I will link it below. And while you're at it, subscribe to the Guitar Craft Newsletter. I'll also link that below. The bridge is where we get our first big difference, and this part actually confuses me a bit. This is a PRS bridge on the SE version, and it looks like a 6-screw bridge that had the middle 4 screws removed. So yes, it's a 2-point trem, but the 2 points are sealed like a traditional trim. The saddles are also very traditional. So this is not just a copy of a normal Fender 2-point trim. This is something completely different by PRS. By contrast, the USA version has the regular 6-screw design with the regular traditional saddles. And so this looks pretty standard, but it is a PRS version, so it is very smooth. It stays in tune very well. And we have a set screw for the whammy bar, so you can decide how tight you want it to be. And we have that same set screw on the SE version. So here's the thing. I personally prefer having a 2-point trem pretty much all the time, and I use the trem a lot. So I very much appreciate the 2-point trem style here. The 6-screw design is what John Mayer prefers, and so I guess that's why it's on this particular version. But I'm not John Mayer, and so I don't really care that this version has a 6-screw design. If it were up to me, I would get the cheaper bridge because again, they both stay in tune equally well. They both work equally well. They both have the same amount of adjustability, and they're both very smooth and all of that stuff. So for me, the SE trem is better, but if you like 6-screw design, of course the USA model is for you. In terms of the controls, we have the same layout, a 5-way switch, and it's actually a very pretty 5-way switch. It feels nice and it's slightly different from what you would expect, but it's just a 5-way switch. Then we have a master volume knob, a tone knob for the neck and the middle pickup, and then the second tone knob is just for the bridge pickup. So we have that mod that comes on a lot of the more modern Stratocaster guitars. So now let's talk about the pickups, and I have something that I want to explain to you today. You may have noticed if you watched any of my other reviews, I don't spend a lot of time giving you a ton of tone demos, and let me explain why. By the time you hear the video, By the time you hear the pickups go through my particular amp and my settings, through YouTube compression, through whatever weird headphones you have or speakers you have or don't have, it's going to sound completely different than what it sounds like to me here today. That's the first thing. Number two, when I'm comparing two guitars that have different pickups, there are so many things that are going to go into how those two different guitars sound, not just the pickups. And then of course the pickups themselves are going to have slightly different variations, right? These pickups are not going to be exactly the same on every single guitar. And then when we're comparing the two, if one is slightly higher, slightly lower, it's going to be slightly different. If I pick slightly harder, if my hand is in a different position just by an inch or a half an inch, that's going to make a difference. And for all of these reasons, I just don't see the point in going into this extreme detail about how different the two pickups are. That being said, I will say a couple of things here. The SE version has very nice pickups that sound like a Stratocaster. The one thing I don't like about some Stratocaster setups is that sometimes the bridge pickup sounds too thin and too bright and really unusable. On the SE version, the bridge pickup is balanced beautifully with the rest of the pickups. If you like a traditional Strat sound, maybe slightly underwound, these are going to sound phenomenal to you. They sound great to me as well. The USA version also has amazing, beautifully sounding pickups. Like the SE version, the bridge pickup is not too bright, it's not too shrill, it's not too thin. It balances well with all of the other pickups and it sounds great in every position. When I play both guitars back to back, they sound great. I can't hear one sounding cheaper, I just hear a different sounding Stratocaster pickup. Very good Stratocaster pickups, voiced slightly differently, but again, the voicing difference does not sound like a cheap versus expensive difference. I'll let you decide for yourself which one you like, and I'll tell you the results at some point in the video. All right, so now we're at the portion where I'm giving you a recommendation, and this has been really difficult for me. In fact, I've made this entire full video 2 separate times over the last 3 weeks, and I had to stop and change them while I was editing because I kept changing my mind about this whole thing. And so let's just talk about what makes these two guitars different and how I feel about it. The SE version of this guitar is very nice. It's a great Stratocaster. The USA version of the guitar is a great Stratocaster. Done. They're both fantastic guitars if we ignore the price. When we compared the two guitars, over the course of using this guitar for 2 months, the tuning stability, the overall body stability has been phenomenal. There was just one day in 2 months where the temperature went from around 60, 70 degrees down to around 30 degrees. And on that one day, this guitar's tuning slipped more than it usually does. But once I tuned it back up, it was totally fine. And again, it didn't need a truss rod adjustment or anything. It just went out of tune dramatically one time. I had the USA version through that same weather change and it didn't budge whatsoever. The tuning on this guitar is phenomenal. In terms of the tuning stability when using the trem system, they're both exactly the same. They're both essentially perfect. Now, the one giant difference between these two guitars is the neck. But again, the neck difference isn't really a better or worse thing. It's more of a personal preference thing. The SE version has a slightly thinner neck, and it feels more like every other brand, if we're being honest. It feels like most other guitars in this price range, they have that medium C neck, and it feels nice. The more expensive version has a slightly thicker neck. And the neck, in my opinion, feels a little bit more high quality, if you will. But again, the bigger difference is the shape and the thickness. And so if you actually prefer a thinner neck, You might even go and buy the SE version of this guitar, even though it's less expensive. Even if you have the money, maybe you buy the SE version because you like a thinner neck. Now, of course, the other difference is the locking tuners, but guys, you know how it is. If you want locking tuners on a guitar, you just buy them for 80 bucks, you throw them on a guitar, and you don't have to spend 3 times the price to get that on the USA version. And so, I don't know, I'm really torn about these two guitars. On one hand, when I pick up the USA version, I can feel the neck, it feels more expensive. It does feel more expensive than the SE version. But does it feel 3 times more expensive? The tuning stability isn't 3 times as good. The pickups don't sound better or worse, they just sound different. This is one of those situations where I feel like if the more expensive version, if the USA version, which is around $2,700, if this guitar was $1,500, I would say that everyone should go out and buy this guitar today. But for $2,700, I don't know. At $2,700, there are a lot of different options that are going to feel special. And this guitar feels less special because this one exists. This SE version is such a great guitar that, in my opinion, it devalues the USA version. If this guitar never came out, this guitar would be better. But since this less expensive version exists, even though I personally prefer a thicker neck, I would probably get the SE version. But that's just me personally. That's just me. And so let me just summarize all of that. If you like a great Stratocaster with a thinner neck, even if you have $3,000, you probably should buy the SE version because it's a thinner neck version of the USA version. If you absolutely need a guitar with a slightly thicker neck and you have $3,000, I guess you should buy the USA version, but at the same time, if you have $3,000, you can buy a lot of other guitars with a thicker neck that you might think are a little bit more special. Just being honest, since this is non-sponsored. Speaking about non-sponsored, let's talk again about the hype between these two guitars when they first came out. A lot of YouTubers would have you believe that these guitars don't feel like Stratocasters. They would tell you that these guitars feel like this amazing new blend of a PRS and something old and something new and all. They're Stratocasters. They sound like Strats. They feel like Strats. They just have 3 per side tuners, which I don't love the looks of, but that's not a huge deal. They're Stratocasters. By the way, I'm Andre Flood. Give this video a like if you appreciate my honesty. Comment below and let me know what you think about the 2 price differences, and I'll talk to you soon.